I just feel like it's a very community-driven conference. It also has a lot of quality, and people are just nice. Hi, my name is Sarah, and this is Asian Conf in Dornbirn.
Amazing venue. Austria is beautiful. Meeting all of the people in the community and getting to go and hang out and ski.
Okay, is this on? We're going? We're live? Doing it live? Great. So, super excited to be here. It is my first time in Austria. I'm from California in the US, and it is very cold here. And fun fact, when I get nervous, I get really cold, and now it's already really cold here, so I'm just gonna be like shaking so much. So that's why, because it's cold here. But we're here to talk about React Native and accessibility. I decided to do kind of an intro, beginner-friendly kind of this, because there's not that many accessible apps out there, and not sure why. I feel like it needs to be more ingrained from the beginning. So if you need a closer look at these slides in my speaker notes, bit.ly/reactnative A11Y. Ellie did a great explanation on numeronym, which is for I18.9, so we have A11Y for accessibility. So those are available if you need a closer look. All my links will be there, so be sure to check that out. I'll also tweet it out afterwards. Little introductions. I'm Erin Fox. I hang out on Twitter as Erin Fox with 2 O's. People call me like Erin Fuchs, which is kind of weird, but it works. I'm a software engineer at The Wing. It's a network of community and workspaces designed for women. And we believe that when women gather, you go further, faster together. And right now, I'm over there working on a brand new Android app in React Native. I've historically worked with React Native before in the past, but I never really got the opportunity to really dive into accessibility before. And so this talk was such a great opportunity for me to research more and learn more about the drawbacks and the great things that React Native has to offer. So, little outline. We're going to dive into what accessibility is. I know we all have a new bright idea of what it is, but we're going to narrow it down. We'll talk about designing apps with accessibility in mind, and then we'll focus specifically on React Native and dive a little into their documentation. I keep bouncing, and then everything's bouncing, so weird. Cats. I love cats, so obviously I need to talk a little bit about that. I've built a small, little, basic, sloppy React Native app in Expo, and we'll get into that, which will be fun and exciting demo near the middle. And then we'll lunch, which is exciting because those sandwiches yesterday were pretty good. Hopefully they're equally as good. So I like to ask a ton of questions. I feel like I'm always that junior on the team that asks so many questions that, I do my research and I Google and then I'll come ask you a question, but I like to ask a lot. So I think as we'll discuss further, what accessibility is, it's why should we make applications accessible? It can be a very complex question, but why aren't we building them? Why aren't we building them to make it more accessible to more people? And notice I don't say make it accessible to everyone. I think that's near impossible. I think if you know your product and you know your users, and you do that extensive research to know your users, that's who you're trying to target. Not everyone. You're trying to target your essential users that you're going for. And some managers or team leads might not even have accessibility cross their mind. They might say, well, why do we need to add accessibility? Our app's fast. We have a ton of users. It's going very great. It's not really on the business plan. I've heard that a few times. Not that great. And from my experience, once they do jump on board, they will add it, not from the beginning, but down, building the boat as you're going, which is great. It's always amazing to add more accessibility, but it's so much easier to add it from the beginning. So the goal for the next 30-ish minutes is I don't have a drone. Sorry, I should put that out there. We're not doing accessibility drone today. But really is to just inspire you and introduce best practices for writing accessible React Native apps, and really to realize that you can't build the perfect, most accessible app. It's researching and learning and doing the best you can for your users with accessibility. And Kat Holmes, who is a designer and engineer at Google, I think really said it beautifully. She says, we start thinking and designing for inclusion, and we will start to recognize exclusion. And that's a lot of where my inspiration for this talk came from, is her book called Mismatch: How Inclusion Shapes Designs. It's on Amazon. It's a great read. It really opened my eyes to accessibility, also with design and code and like on the outside world. And one thing that she talks about is she kind of rewords the word accessibility as to a mismatch. So we have all these different mismatches in our lives that are disability, but we're going to call them mismatches. So I was in Munich earlier this month, or week. I wasn't here for a month, a week. And I'm trying to order beer, I'm trying to order food, and I don't speak the language. So that was a mismatch situation. Or if you break your arm and you only have one arm to like answer your phone, you can't really hit that top button to answer. It's like, okay, I'm just not going to answer this phone call. So that's a mismatched situation. It's temporarily disabled. It's just, there's so many different mismatches out there that we're maybe not thinking of, and now's the time to really start thinking of it. So what is accessibility? If I were to go around the room and ask all of you what accessibility is, we'd have hundreds of different answers. Let's try and narrow it down a little bit. So the most common ones of accessibility maybe that you think of is someone could be blind, vision impaired, deaf, colorblind, or maybe similar, you might have one that might come to mind when you think of it, but now it's like, okay, this disabled, temporary disabled, but how does this affect the way that I code? Having contrasting colors, creating components that are compatible with VoiceOver for iOS or TalkBack for Android. The list really can go on just by knowing, again, your users and your product, and knowing if your users need to be or have TalkBack turned on their phone, you need to be able to label your components with properties so the TalkBack actually works. There's also many unpopular, I should say, there's just also like life circumstances. You're holding a child, trying to hit that phone call button, or you're trying to reject that phone call button because you don't want to answer, and you're unable to. You wear glasses, so maybe you like zoom in super close. I think my parents have the maximum font on every app that they have, which kind of makes the design ugly in some apps if it's not accessible for you. If you break your arm, internationalization, I-18-9, I-18N, that Ellie went over great. It's just really, it's knowing that there's more that are not similar to what you have. And another thing about accessibility is I've never seen it required in curriculum before. I'm a boot camp rat, so I had about 3 months of web development experience before getting my first job, and I had about an hour of accessibility on what it was, and it just blew by my head. So I think we really need to break the habit of putting it off and not making it a priority when we're educating. It's important to set aside time for your team to be able to look up documentation, learn your users, and just continually ask who is unable to access my product and from my code is really critical for accessibility. So now we're going to get into some facts. I love some facts. So according to the World Health Organization, 1 billion or 15% of the world's population experience some form of disability. And so there are over 6.4 billion people who are temporarily able-bodied. Like 6.4 billion people is a lot of people in the world who can't or might not be able to use your product. That's a huge market that you're already missing out on. And so it's incredibly difficult, like doing more with less, but the design that works for greater, more diverse portion of the population, and kind of that's why we're here. I mean, a few of you might be here just to go skiing, which fair enough, but we're going to sneak in some knowledge before that. We're just, as engineers, we're continuously growing. I feel like if you're not open to learning new things, you kind of stunt your career. And so learning accessibility is a great outlet for you to be able to expand yourself, make your team better, make your product better, and also just add it to your resume to make you just a more well-rounded engineer. And so later on, I'll show you my small little cat app. But I think a good thing to note is like there's always room for improvement. And even if you have 0 accessibility on your app right now, fine. Like there's so many more options and so much research that you can do to add it. I feel like it's a very feel-good thing to be like, my app is accessible, which great. And then I feel like sometimes if it isn't accessible, you hide in the shadows, whatever. There's always room for improvement. It's never going to be perfect, and there's always a chance for you to add accessibility to your app. So we'll dive specifically into mobile apps. So where do we start? So I think before this, it really starts with who you hire on your team. And so if you hire and create a diverse team, you really do gain more insights from them who may have likely experienced different kinds of exclusions from yourself. Then you'll educate the team. You'll give them time, as I mentioned, to learn accessibility, have times to practice it, to look at open source projects around it. So hire a diverse team, understand your users, have time to practice and learn within your team, and it really will expand your experiences to gain more empathy for others. And I'm not telling you how exactly to make your app accessible, but if you're not aware of these issues, then it might not have come to you from the beginning. And so where do we all start? Well, hopefully most of us start with documentation. I hated documentation for so long until I found some good ones and then loved it. So once we're all on board, we're going to look at some docs. So surprise, Android accessibility documentation. They have a great, fantastic site where they do a lot of announcements of new features coming out, like live captioning. They have really well-written blog posts, so if you're using React Native, you're definitely needing to check out the different devices that you'll be using it on. So Android accessibility documentation is a great start. If you haven't played around with your accessibility features on Android, it's a little tricky. Definitely, if you are designing an app and you need it to be accessible, which you should have it accessible, please check this out. An example would be like, I need to turn on my screen reader, so when I tap on something, tap on a header, if I'm vision impaired and I need to know what it says, I'll tap on the header and it will, the voiceover, or I should say TalkBack for Android, will read it back to me. But with that, the user will really rely on your code to have these features in order for TalkBack to work. So labeling your components is essential, which we'll get into soon, and it's very important. And surprise, iOS accessibility. So very Apple-y documentations, very white and clean looking. Check it out, learn all the terms. Again, go on your iPhone accessibility features. You could turn on hints here, you could turn off hints, you could do inverted colors. I used to do that and think I was very cool and have all these weird colors, but it's actually for vision impaired individuals. You can font size, zoom, magnification. You could literally change your entire app. You can change your entire phone. And users might be doing this with your product, and you might not even know it, and they can't use it. So you're creating separation for your users of feeling left out and not being able to use it. Of course, the React Native accessibility documentation. I don't believe you can build an accessible React Native app without coming here a few times. We'll be looking at a specific of these examples coming up, but hopefully this is very beginner friendly. Obviously, check out the documentation, know the documents and the devices that you're working on, which will really help you understand how to turn on and off features when you're developing a React Native app. I found this really cool poster on gov.uk. It's from the Department of Home Office Digital. It's in 10 different languages. They've really provided just a great introduction. I know it's very hard to see. The link is in my notes. But some examples would be, say you have like a children's reading app, and maybe one of the users, the children, are on the autistic spectrum. So you will have to do specific things within your app to help it more usable. So it's like best to describe buttons, like having attached files instead of saying click me. So it'd be easier for the user, a child in this example, to use the product. We also might have a user who has some form of dyslexia. So using, understanding that lists of words, having images and diagrams are better than lists and words, and understand that underlining text, align everything allows for a better comprehension. So again, just really understanding your user and being able to change your code and your design to fit with what they need is a huge part of it. So we'll dive into React Native accessibility. So the React Native includes API designed really to provide developers with support for making more accessible apps. And Android and iOS differ slightly with their approaches, but React Native really has implementations that vary for each of them. And so there's different bundles for iOS and Android. They're just different assistive technologies that allow for like screen reader, for voiceover, for iOS, and talkback for Android, which I'm focusing a little bit, leaning on that way. And then it lets you look at component examples of the React Native properties. So let's dive into that. So the first one here, we just have a basic view on line 1 where that star is. So anytime you see a star, that will be what we're focusing on. We have a view, and we have accessible is true. So when a view is an accessible element, it groups its children into a single selected component. And by default, all touchable elements are accessible. I've added them throughout on mine too, but it's good to note that all touchable are defaulted to true for accessibility. And on Android, accessibility equals true will be translated natively to focusable equals true. So a little twist there. And so we get a focus on a parent view on the accessible property. We'll go through a couple more. So accessibility label, press me. So now we have a touchable opacity. I have the accessibility equals true, even though it's defaulted to true. I just want to ingrain that in your minds. So our label here will be press me. It looks like we have an on press. We got some text, and we have our touchable opacity. So when a view is marked as accessible, it's good practice to set an accessibility label on the view so that people with voiceover will have something for their talkback to them. VoiceOver will read the string when the user selects the element. So the way VoiceOver works, if you have a screen and you have a header, if you have VoiceOver turned on your device, for iOS, if you tap once, it will read, press me. And then if you tap it again, it will actually perform that action. So understanding how that works and understanding having a label makes it able for your user to use it. Hints, accessibility hint. I always love a good hint. So a new GIF will show on every press. We have our touchable opacity. We have accessible is true, even though touchables are always true. We have our labels. So this really helps the user understand what will happen when they perform an action on an accessibility element when that result is not apparent from the accessibility label. So you can turn on and off hints on your device. Right now, you cannot turn it off on Android, so it will be reading it on Android. So VoiceOver will read the hint after the label, so we'll talk back, and if the user has the hint enabled on their phone. So if it's not enabled on their phone, it won't read. If it is, it will read. Role. So for this touchable opacity, it's a button, a little self-explanatory, so the property communicates the purpose of the component to the user. And there are many, many options that you could do with an accessibility role. This is literally a screenshot from the documentation. You can have keyboard, text, adjustable button. There's many, many that you see. If there's one that you don't see, maybe create a PR to the React Native thing and add it and get approved, and then it will be on there. Open source. So there's that for that one. And then this one's pretty cool. So accessibility, ignore inverted colors. I don't know, I always would like change my inverted colors because like felt cool and different. This was like before dark mode. So I took these images from Daniel Dunn's article, which is also linked here. And so when you change your settings, so this one would be in iOS, features to inverted colors, you'll see that you'll go from this white background, gold Hamilton image, and you have this kind of blue touchable button at the bottom. You'll turn on your inverted colors, and then we kind of have this like creepy photo, and then you'll have this blue Hamilton and the button. And so say we didn't want to have our image to have inverted colors, because if I'm vision impaired, I know what my profile photo will look like. And so I'll set accessibility ignore invert colors on my image tag, equals true for my photo. So everything else will be inverted except for my photo. So if you have a profile on your app and people are inverting their colors, it's good to kind of keep the image as they expect it to be. So this is one way that you're able to do that. There's also accessibility info. And so this helps you get the current various statuses of the user's device for both Android and iOS. And so you can even track it as it changes. And you can add these as event listeners to your initial state, or your use effect, or your component did mount. So you can tell and actually get feedback if your users are using a screen reader, or if they are building their text, if they are zooming in. So this is a way to learn more about how they're using their own devices with your app. Cool, example time. So when I was in between jobs, I really needed to understand React hooks, and so kind of led me to build this little app. So it started off as a random cat GIF app because I love cats. I have one cat. I've been told you're not allowed to have two because then that makes you crazy. So I'm only allowed to have one. But a little walkthrough of what we have. So we have a big title at the top. We have this image, which is initially a GIF. And then we have this new GIF, please button that we have down here. And then we have this picker at the bottom that has cats, dogs, and there is an option for bunnies. So initially I just was like, cats rule. And I was mentoring with, I was pairing with a mentor, and they're like, not everybody really likes cats. Broke my heart. So I had to add some options of dogs and bunnies. I'm not going to show you the bunnies, because even though the Giphy GitHub or the Giphy API has ratings, it's like borderline inappropriate at times, so we're going to stick with the cats and the dogs. So let's hope this is working. I'll walk through it. Yes. And it's also a very fun app to build for myself, because I would just keep clicking the button over and over again, which you'll see, I didn't get much done. Cool. OK, so we have our random GIF app. We can hit new GIF, please. Oh, yes. Mustache. So you see, it gets very distracting. I'll walk through the code with you all. Again, I should point out, there's only one main user focus, and that's me. So for me, accessibility, I just wanted to play around with it and learn it. There's not really a single user, because I'm the user and I like cats, so I built the cat app. So yeah, so we kind of go through. We have a lot of our tag, which we have fetching with our Giphy API. I keep saying GitHub API. It's Giphy API. Don't steal my key, please. We're all nice people. And see how I have PG? Not really PG for the bunnies. So we won't be looking at those ones. And so we'll jump down to our JSX here. Let me get rid of this, and I'll zoom in. Let's look at this touchable opacity here. So we have accessible is true. I know, I mentioned a few times. It's always true, so I don't necessarily need to have it here, but I added it here to help you remember. We're looking, so it's going to be this little pink new GIF button, please, on the app, and it's the role, accessibility role is a button. And then we have press me for a new GIF as the label. We have accessibility hint as a new GIF will show on every press. And then we have some text. We have some text down there, and then that's kind of our touchable opacity there with our accessibility elements on it. And I added some other ones within our image. I think one thing that's important to call out is if you are vision impaired, you might not necessarily go to this app because it's just looking at GIFs. But if you're interested in it, I added the image title, so it will say, we'll show the voiceover in a moment. It will be like mustache cat image. So it will have the title of the tag that's coming back from the JSON object. So we're able to have like some form of voiceover description if you are vision impaired. So let's try it. I'm going to have sound, I hope. We'll find out. OK, so I usually open my Xcode, and then we have Xcode developer tools and then accessibility inspector. And so typically the way that this would work, we're going to hit my simulator for that, is in a real-world situation, I would just have VoiceOver enabled on my iOS device. I would tap random GIF app, and it would say random, like robot voice, random GIF app header. And so with what we're doing with the accessibility inspector, it's just going to like run through it pretty quickly. So I'll let it go a few times, and hopefully we have some sound here. No? Sound? No worries. Maybe it's me. Well, I do a great robot voice, so we'll see. Yeah?
Random GIF app, header, cat GIF, image, press me for a new GIF button, cat, adjustable, random GIF app, header, cat GIF, image, press me for a new GIF button, cat, adjustable,
We'll go one more
random
time.
GIF app, header, cat GIF, image, press me for a new GIF button, cat, adjustable, random.
Okay, so it goes pretty fast, but you can see based on what I've added with the accessibility label, the hint, you can say it's a button. You can hear it's just a cat GIF. Let's see what this one says. Sometimes the titles are really long, which are fun.
Fuzzy cat GIF, image,
Fuzzy
press me for a new GIF button, cat, adjustable, random GIF app, header.
Cool. So we kind of get the gist of that. And pretty cool. You could clap. I mean, that'd be nice. But cool. Thank you. Okay, so say we wanted to take that a step further. We have our touchable opacity here, and these are like kind of long, and sometimes I might forget to add one. We can pull them out and maybe to like accessible components. So let's keep looking at this button here. We have maybe accessible button. And so I'm going to say for iOS, we're going to do this. And then if it's not iOS, we're going to do Android. We're going to do this because some props work on certain devices. So that's why I'm just splitting them out for two for now. And then we'll say touchable opacity, accessible is true. Hint, we'll do props.hint, props.label, props.role. We'll get some props.children in there. So then when we are able and want to render it, we can do it this way. So we just say role equals button or label equals press me for a new GIF. So this would kind of like, it's like a sneaky way of doing accessibility when you don't really know that you're doing accessibility. So be able to have these components from the start of a project is, I think, a really great aspect to have in there. So you already have accessible components from the beginning, and you just have to say role. You don't even have to type out the whole thing. So being able to pull out these accessibility features for your components is a fun little trick. All right, so what are the next steps? Hire for diversity. Have everyone on your team, project managers, higher-ups, managers, just really be aware of the plan, of who your users are, what accessibility features you need. Your QA team isn't just there to click around and do buttons. They can also be running accessibility features as well. Be aware of the process, do your research. Let's kick the habit, and if you speak or you teach anyone, teach them to do accessibility. This was a small, tiny app, but I wanted to have accessibility in it. Maybe even when you're doing a small one, add those features there as well. Do your research, look at those docs, know your users, build the skills, and just really make accessible apps. And open source your code. If you open source your code, maybe there's an accessibility feature that I need that is not on your app. Maybe you're not putting the role on all of your apps, and I want to add them to your app. And it's a great way to even get introduced and start to do open source and contribute to it. So definitely check out documentation. If there's something there that you need or that your users need, contribute to open source. It's a win-win. Do a workshop. So on front-end masters, Marcy does an amazing talk, accessibility in JavaScript applications. She covers how to debug it for web and for accessibility and manual automated testing. It's incredible. Highly recommend you checking it out. Maybe if like workshops aren't your thing, you can watch some YouTube. Everybody loves a good YouTube talk. Annika gave a talk last year at React Amsterdam called Make Your React Native Apps Accessible. The link will be in my speaker notes. So definitely, it's a great one. I would highly recommend checking it out. And then if workshops, watching videos aren't your thing, maybe you can read some. So Lauren has written amazing articles about mobile accessibility resources and creating inclusive apps. So please check that out. And so in conclusion, I guess kind of to wrap it all up, because I hear a little rustle and we're getting hungry, let's start designing from the beginning and coding accessible React Native apps. So you hopefully have an idea of where to start. You saw that there's voiceover capabilities. As long as you kind of have a direction and an idea of this in your mind, that's all I really hope for. I think Holmes said it very thoughtfully as it's an opportunity to be curious and approach challenges with a desire to learn. And by being here and actively listening and participating and watching and engaging, I think is the start to considering accessibility and like proactively, it's really what this presentation is trying to accomplish. So again, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for being here. And just by being here really is a step for a more inclusive online world. So thank you.